I always see Tucker when he was on Fox, he said things that are very different in tone and topic than he does now. And he was very magnanimous and kind to me because for years I followed on Monday his monologue, and he and Laura and Sean were very nice to me, and I hope to get back on Fox as soon as I feel a little better. But so I'm not trying to be ungracious, but I don't know what's happened to him. I think a lot of it was the filters at Fox, actually in an ironic sense, were good for him because when if he did want to go into those territories, they would advise him not to. But this latest one, the problem I have is the factual stuff. Daryl Cooper said things that were factually incorrect about the firebombing of the Black Forest, about Churchill's role at particular times and going to war. He wasn't even prime minister when they declared war. That was Neville Chamberlain, and he says that he was treated unfairly by... Neville Chamberlain was invited into the cabinet. Everything he said was factually, historically incorrect. And Neil Ferguson, my colleague and friend, and also Andrew Roberts, the three of us did a Peter Robinson on Common Knowledge about that people can watch. But he said some things that I thought were reprehensible about suggesting that if the Huckabee said this was the historic home of the Jews and there had been Jews there since biblical times, all true. And then after the Holocaust, there was, and even before that, with the rise of 19th century Zionism, there were Jewish migrants. But there were Arab migrants to the West Bank too. There were people coming in all the time. But the historical people who were there first were the Jews. And that was just a point Huckabee made. And then Tucker said, "You think that gives them a particular right?" And he said, "Yes. At least they're not strangers." And he said, "Well, why don't they all take DNA tests?" Well, the problem with that is that Jewishness is not necessarily confined to be an ethnic rubric. It can be religious as well. There's black Jews, there's white Jews, there can be Asian. Anybody can be a follower of Judaism. I understand that. And but the other thing is, given the Holocaust and racial purity and genetics, you don't say that. You have to take a genetic test to show whether you're a Jew. Then what are they going to do? Wear another yellow star to say I am a Jew? And this is going to be advantageous, and that means I get to stay in Israel. So it didn't come off well. And then he made something that I thought was egregious when they got on to Cutter, whatever you want to pronounce it. When Huckabee, there was an argument when Tucker made the argument that Christians were more numerous in Gutter and they were better treated. And Huckabee said that was untrue, and they disagreed. And Huckabee was right. Tucker was referring probably to sheer numbers. I think there's 400,000 people in Gutter that practice Christianity, but that's not what Huckabee was trying to say. He was trying to say that there's citizens of Gutter compared to citizens of Israel. There's 180,000 citizens in Israel that are Christians, and they have a right to build a church. They have a right to build a steeple. They have a right to have a bell. They can build it anywhere they want, almost, unless it's, right next to taking land from someone else or something. They have complete rights of freedom of worship. They're protected. That is why people are going to Israel from the West Bank and Gaza who were Christian, and from Lebanon. Everybody knows that. What Tucker is talking about are 400,000 guest workers, but I guess helot would be a better term. They come from Asia, the Philippines, Indonesia, India, and they're paid below world standards for that type of job. They have special enclaves in which they live. They're not citizens of Gutter, and they are allowed to worship in prescribed places. They cannot go outside and open a church. They cannot go to one of their bosses and say, "Here's a Bible. Would you like to read it?" They cannot sit in a park bench and pray. Everybody born in Gutter is a Muslim at birth. If they do not want to be a Muslim at birth, it's illegal to change your religion. You can't do it publicly. Maybe you can do it privately and nobody knows about it. That's not true about Christianity in Israel. It's not true about if you're an Israeli Jew and you want to be a Christian, you can convert. You might have social pressures, but it's legal to do that. So it was completely erroneous what he said. And that brings up, and we don't have time to get on all of them, but that brings up the motive. Why all of a sudden when you leave Fox do you keep on this topic, a topic of Jews and Israel. Why? And I don't know. I don't know if the effort is to move major figures in the MAGA movement like J.D. Vance to the right, or to be friendly with particular powerful people, and then you say things that are very edgy, and that puts them, as it did with Kevin Roberts, on the spot. Do you support your friend, or is that the way he's exercising influence? I hope that's not, because ultimately he's going to lose that, because no one can run for president, and Trump knows that. Nobody can be president when someone is very close to you who says that people in Israel should take a DNA test to prove that they're actually Jews, or that this Gutter, by the way, and people please correct me, but I am pretty sure that they did not outlaw virtual slavery to the 1960s or the late 50s. Maybe they were before Saudi Arabia. And that means, when I mean slavery, I mean people who were hiring people as workers who were confined to barracks, and they were not allowed to move around, and their pay was adjudicated only by the employer, no dissent. They had no civil rights. And that came up. And, there's a good thing in Powerline today about a new book. I think the man's name was Mazol. I'll have to look, but he wrote about the Islamic slave trade. And he points out that it was actually more closer to 16 or 17 million. Everybody, and no one talks about it. They talk about the 11 million, as they should, that came to the New World, but not the much greater number. And then in the book, apparently there's some grotesque descriptions of mandatory castration of young African boys with a 90% fatality rate, to have the eunuchs of the Arab, the Islamic world, the Ottoman world, and then hundreds of thousands of so-called, that's where we get the word slave from the word Slav, white people from the Balkans, southern Italy, that were captured by the Barbary pirates, etc., etc. So this idea that slavery was not known as much by the Arab world is completely not true. It was much more common in the Arab world, the Islamic world, than even in the European world. And Gutter had a very atrocious human rights record. And if you, by any modern standard, if you say that if a person is born into a country and they have free will, and they should have the free will to speak as they want, to vote, and to choose their own religion, then it fails miserably on all those counts. As most, I guess the Emirates is the only exception to some degree, but all those countries fail that contest. And so I don't know why why would you say that? Why would you try to defend that system over a parliamentary democracy in Israel? I don't understand it.
You were referring to, I was looking at Powerline while you...
Yes.
I was paying attention. I was ignoring you.
I know you were.
It's a link from a Free Beacon article, The Islamic Slave Trade by Tunku Varadarajan at the Free Beacon. I think that's what you're referring to. So, but Powerline links
yeah, that was by Tunku, our friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I was. And it's a much-needed study, and I'm going to try to buy that book immediately and read it. But again, I think I haven't been to, well, I've landed in Gutter, but I haven't been, I don't like people who say they land at an airport and they visit a country, but
right.
I've been to almost all the Arab countries. I've been a long time at Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Jordan. I was in Iraq twice. And I can tell you, it's not like Israel. It's just not. When you go to Israel, whatever your political persuasions or religious preferences are, it's a breath of fresh air.
And most of those countries,
it's free.
They all had Jewish enclaves in those countries, many of them. Not anymore. So.
I don't think I've been to Israel once when I have not seen a protest from the right or left against the existing government. Put it that way. And when I read the Jerusalem Post or the Israeli Times or Haaretz or whatever it's constant back and forth. It's an open, free, combative political system that is non-existent in the Arab world. It's a monolithic voice. You just echo who is in power and the general Arab narrative in general. And if you want to say, I think it's time for close relations with Israel, you can't do that for all practical purposes and maintain a viable, safe existence.
One last thing.
Anybody knows that. Anybody who's been there knows that.
Well, the attack on Benjamin Netanyahu also was like he's not a real Jew. He doesn't practice religion. I'm not saying
Tucker said that he
wasn't.
called Tucker a racist or something. I don't remember him ever saying that. Maybe Tucker could tell us when Netanyahu said that. Netanyahu's pretty careful about talking about American politics, you know. He is. Everybody thinks he shoots from the hip, but he doesn't really get into, I mean, he's controversial on the left here, but I don't remember him ever calling Tucker Carlson a racist. He might have said that he has anti-Semitic tendencies, but not racism, I don't think. But I don't know what's going to happen because they're coming up to the midterms, and these midterms are going to be very close, and the election of 2028 will probably be very close, and the anti-Semitism that's in the doctrinaire anti-Semitism is on the left. We all saw that with the student protests, the roughing up of Jews, the DEI woke prejudice, the knockout game where black teens inordinately attack Jews, the statistics on hate crimes, on who are the perpetrators and who are the victims, on the whole Farrakhan movement. We see that on the left, but we hadn't seen it recently on the right, and you've got to stop it because there's going to be a lot of people who won't want to vote unless you don't. It's not a matter of silencing people or deplatforming. It just says, you know, given everything, I don't want to hear anymore that the Jews are at the root of all evil and that they're killing Charlie Kirk or Mossad is doing this or Epstein was an Israeli. Epstein was a left-wing wannabe. That's what he was. He lavished money. He may have blackmailed people insidiously, but he was a pervert. But the water that fish swam in was left-wing urban America, elite America, and Europe. I'd like to return to this often contentious subject in the news of why the United States supports Israel. I must come clean. I am not a Christian Zionist. I feel I'm a Christian, but I have no special advocacy to support Israel because it's a biblical home of the Jews and by extension the Judeo-Christian traditions of which I am a member. And I can even confess as a rural resident who grew up and isolated on a farm, I don't recall anybody being Jewish, and I had never met anybody Jewish till I was 18 years old when I went to the University of California campus at Santa Cruz. And for the first time in my life, I met somebody who said he was Jewish. So I don't come to this issue with any particular hidden agenda, whether it's Christian Zionist, that's a new term that's in use now, or as an advocate of Jewish Americans or Israelis. I do it for one reason. I support Israel for one reason. It is in the interest of my country and the United States. Now, why would that be? I'll give you one example. In 2012, 13, and 14, the United States embarked on a joint missile defense program with Poland and the Czech Republic in Eastern Europe. You know that because in 2012, that same year, Barack Obama was caught on a hot mic right before his campaign that he was willing to be flexible on missile defense in Eastern Europe, i.e. give it up if Vladimir Putin would give him space before his re-election, i.e. don't invade Ukraine or don't invade anybody like you did in 2008 with Ossetia. Both of them kept the bargain. Putin didn't invade, and for 2 years, Obama was re-elected, and they removed missile defense. But what was the missile defense for? It wasn't to protect us. It couldn't from Russia's 7,000 nuclear-tipped missiles. It was designed to protect Europe from Iran. They were paranoid that, unlike us, they were in range of new Iranian missiles, and Iran was considered hell-bent on getting a nuclear weapon. So it was in our interest, forget Israel, forget anything else in the Cold War vis-a-vis the prior Cold War between Russia and the United States. It was in NATO's interest to protect the European continent from whom? Iran. And that made sense, didn't it? Because Iran had killed almost, if not more, Americans than ISIS had, or Al-Qaeda had. Al-Qaeda was responsible via bin Laden for 3,000 deaths on September 11, 2001. But Iranian Shia terrorists all over the globe had killed Americans. They killed Americans in Beirut, in the Marine barracks, in the embassy. They gave shaped charges to our enemies in Iraq and probably were responsible for over 2,000 American soldiers dying or being maimed. So they were existential enemies of America, and we had taken efforts well aside from Israel to protect our allies and ourselves from Iranians. And that theocratic anti-American government. There was another reason too. We tend to often favor democratic or consensual societies over their antitheses. That's why all of the NATO governments now are consensual, our closest ally. That's why Australia, we are a close ally, and New Zealand, they are consensual. That's why we are closer to Canada than we are to Mexico, because it's more consensual. That's why we are good friends now with Japan. It's a consensual government in a way it was not during World War II. We're consensual government. We see a consensual government in South Korea. Okay, so what is Israel? Israel is a consensual government. It's surrounded by 500 million people of the Islamic world, Shia and Sunni, Iranian and Arab, that aren't. They're not consensual. There's only one government that is truly a free democratic government, and that's Israel. So it has affinities with the United States and interest with the United States that transcends anything to do with the 7 million Americans who are Jewish Americans. That's just a given. They are not directing American policy. They couldn't unless Israel was democratic, consensual, Western, an outpost in a dangerous part of the world that has key resources for global prosperity with oil, and more importantly, is an enemy of our existential enemy that transcends any question of Israeli or Iranian animosity, and that's the theocratic government of Iran that began its existence by taking American hostage and storming our embassy. There's another question as well, is we have all sorts of quasi-allies, of course, that are not consensual, and we give them a lot of money. We give Jordan over $1 billion. We give Egypt over $600 million. We give a country that can be very, very anti-American all sorts of help. Fellow Turkish member Mr. Erdogan's government in Ankara. And we don't require any prior litmus test that they be constitutional or consensual, but nobody seems to object that all the money we give these countries are all the support. So why would you not object for us offering military assistance to Turkey that isn't consensual fully and still illegally occupies northern Cyprus, but you would object to military assistance to Israel that is consensual and shares exactly the same enemies as the United States does, and these enemies are prior to and not relevant to Israel's particular enemies. We would not be friendly with the Iranians regardless of Israel. They took our embassy and they killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans for reasons other than we support Israel. In other words, it's in our self-interest to stop Iran from posing an existential threat to Europe or ourselves, from killing American soldiers, and for trying to disrupt and unsettle the entire Middle East, where 40% of the world's oil is from. And that is well aside from the fact that Israel, the so-called Holy Land, is the foundation, the home, the birthplace of the Judeo-Christian tradition. That is a reason, but it's not the only reason. It's not even the primary reason, nor is the advocacy of Jewish Americans. The primary reason we support Israel, it's in our cold, hard self-interest. Donald Trump rages and screams, and then we look at what actually happens. So they wanted a closed border. They thought it lowered their wages. So this guy comes along. He could have been a Democrat or Republican. Trump had been both.
This isn't about politics. It's about patterns, consequences, and what's coming next. So let's start with someone who doesn't just react. They've studied how this plays out.
Now think about the law firms. I'll give you an example. Where did that come from? That came from after January 6th, Fannie Willis on the direction, after all, Nathan Wade met on November 18th with White House counsel, the same day Jack Smith was appointed special counsel, the same day that Michael Colangelo stepped down from the third spot at the DOJ after coming in from Letitia James's prosecution to go back to Alvin Bragg's, all 3 days after Donald Trump on November 15th of 2022 announced his reelection campaign. So there was a coordination there, but what did they do? I mean, they went after almost every lawyer that had anything to do with Donald Trump.